Tony Katz.
It's Kendall and Casey.
The Amber and Nigel show.
All right, when does your show start? Do we know? I feel like I've been promoting this for 9 years now.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
All right, hello and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC. I'm Stephen Kent, and you may be wondering what has happened to the soothing, dulcet tones of your hero and familiar host, Tony Kinnett. Well, that man is having a good day. He is out enjoying the fruits of a prosperous family life, welcoming a second child into this cold, cold world. And look outside. It's very cold, y'all. It is an honor to take this seat for the week. I'll be with you tonight and tomorrow to guide you through the news of the day. Got big shoes to fill, that Tony Kinnett. I mean, the guy is a trained voice actor. I'm just a podcaster who's been given far too much power. But let's get acquainted, because I'm going to be with you again this week. And my name is Stephen Kent. I've been a weekly guest on this show every Tuesday for the last few months to bring you entertainment news and analysis on the sad, very sad state of Hollywood. I'm a columnist at boundingintocomics.com. Writing about entertainment. I'm an author of a cool book on Star Wars, When It Used to Be Good, How the Force Can Fix the World, and I am the director of media at the Consumer Choice Center. I've been a political commentator for many years now, and you've probably seen me on some point or another on Fox News, Fox Business. Used to do a lot with the Glenn Beck program, Good Times, and I write for USA Today and Newsweek. So now that all that is out of the way and we are best friends, let's get to the news roundup. Now, first thing is first. Monday's Iowa caucus. That was a beautiful, beautiful day. Beautiful day for the former President Donald Trump. He crushed his challengers, Ron DeSantis, a guy I like, Nikki Haley, person I also like, but, by 30 points. It's pretty devastating. You could say that he fired 2 apprentices in one day. Maybe that's an outdated reference. I don't know, but it's still funny to me. Let's hear the Donald's best clip of the night from Monday. Good victory speech.
I want to congratulate Ron and Nikki for having a good time together. We're all having a good time together. And I think they both actually did very well. I really do. I think they both did very well. We don't even know what the outcome of second place is.
Are they having a good time together? Are they doing well? I'm not so sure. There's no evidence of either one of those claims, but you got to give it to Donald Trump. He knows when to turn his class up a notch, and it was a good speech. New Hampshire is up next week on January 23rd. Nikki Haley is expected to be a little more competitive in that state, but rest assured she's going to lose decisively. Ron DeSantis has already packed his bags, isn't even trying. He's headed to South Carolina to take the race to Governor Haley's turf, where both are, again, inevitably going to lose. We'll go a little bit deeper on the Republican primary at the end of the show. The second thing I want to make you aware of is the World Economic Forum is gathered yet again in Davos, Switzerland. They are there plotting out the next century and sharing ideas on how to bring about the new world order. You can't make this stuff up. Let's hear it in the words of WEF Chairman Birge Brinde.
That order seems to not be the order anymore. We are on the way to a new order, so we are between orders. Do you agree with that, or are there ways of what are we able to keep on the positive side from the old order to bring into a new world order, and how can we avoid that new world order becomes like a jungle growing back, and we rather have an order based on international law and the principles that have brought us prosperity and freedom for decades?
I guess, and maybe this is the old kind of teacher in me coming out. I think of this a little bit more about a transition of eras rather than a transition of orders, but the two are kind of cousins of one another. The reason I draw the distinction is because I don't think the international order built after 1945 is getting replaced wholesale with some new order. It will obviously evolve as it has evolved multiple times over the decade since 1945. But I do think in a more sharp and distinctive way, we are moving into a new era, and that's what I talked about in my remarks, that we are, the post-Cold War era has come to a close. We're at the start of something new. We have the capacity to shape what that looks like, and at the heart of it will be many of the core principles and core institutions of the existing order, adapted for the challenges that we face today.
Oh boy, the conspiracy theory folks are going to have a good time with that one. It's amazing the things that people say out loud, for a bunch of PhD, smarty pants types, future rulers of the world. I just listen to that. I go, these people are not too clever. They're giving away the game way too easy. Now, I'll be transparent. I have friends and colleagues up there at Davos right now who are fighting the good fight. Heck, the new president of Argentina, Javier Milei, is up there causing some trouble himself. People working to stop the meddlers and the globalist fund police from getting into your business. There is some good stuff that happens at these international meetings, but it just blows my little southern mind that this man would go up on stage and say the words New World Order when they know the world is watching and is afraid of what they talk about doing up there in Davos. I don't get it. That clip I showed you has been going pretty viral online. That's the first thing I saw this morning when I woke up. And, I just want to say a little something about it. I mean, Brinde is not wrong. We are between world orders. You grew up, all of you, in a world order. The post-World War II global order that was gifted to us by the sacrifices of the greatest generation, with America on top, unquestioned authority, agenda-setting power. But that order is over. I'm not sure when it died, but it might have been August 2021 when Joe Biden botched the withdrawal from Afghanistan. American morale and confidence and strength were shattered on the world stage for every nation to see. Total disgrace. Let our enemies know that we are weak. And when these people get together and talk about world orders, it's not conspiracy. You used to live in a world order, and now we live in chaos. The question I have is, what will the new order be? And who's going to be on top? Well, we will find out. But we're going to move on to the third quick item, and then we're going to take a quick break. So there is a war happening on convenience in this country. You may remember the mess about Biden coming after gas stoves. Well, the budget grocery store chain Aldi has announced that they are ending single-use plastic bags in their stores. Now, there are 82 Aldi grocery stores in Indiana. 10 of those are in the Indianapolis area. I like Aldi. It's a great store, but I actually prefer Lidl a lot more for grocery savings in Biden's inflation economy. But I really don't like this policy. I'm going to speak to a consumer analyst, David Clement, about the movement to rid the world of plastics, which make your everyday life, I think, a little bit more convenient. I know it makes my life better. And on top of that, according to the New York Times, the Biden Department of Justice is looking to sue Apple, the iPhone people, for the crime of having the iPhone and the Apple Watch and the MacBook sync together for consumers. I kid you not. I am an Apple guy. I don't believe PCs and Androids even exist. And DOJ is going to cook up a lawsuit against Apple that would change everything for fans of Apple like me. And I'm going to have on James Chernowski of Americans for Prosperity to explain all of that and more. So stick around with us. I'm Stephen Kent. You're listening to 93.1 WIBC, and we'll be right back.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
All right, thanks for staying with us after the break. I am Stephen Kent, and you are listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast. Folks, I don't know what it is about the Biden administration and their problem with things that work well, but after a few years of harassing Google, Facebook, Amazon, all of these big tech companies in court, not for free speech violations, mind you, which might actually be useful, but for their products being too popular and too well liked, they might be bringing a lawsuit against Apple next. And joining me now out of the swamp is James Chernowski of Americans for Prosperity, a technology writer and expert that I always enjoy reading. James, I'll ask point blank, do you think that the Department of Justice is going to bring a case against Apple, and why are they considering it in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephen, and thanks for having me. When it comes to this case of the DOJ bringing it, I think that given this administration's priorities, that answer is a resounding yes, and that's unfortunate because that's a lot of taxpayer dollars that are get dedicated and eaten up in a massive lawsuit. In a year that seems like we've brought a lot of massive lawsuits against the big tech companies. These are not cheap to go and litigate out. And you know that no matter what happens with the courts, that the losing side will go and appeal this all the way up to SCOTUS if need be. So that's very expensive prospects to go and put taxpayer dollars in this economy into attacking some of the only businesses that are helping keeping costs lower for Americans. In terms of why, as you kind of mentioned at the outset, they're very popular. But it's also just related to a lot of unrelated things about their business model, more broadly speaking. Like Apple's entire business model is built off of having a synchronous experience. No matter what Apple device you're using, it's going to seamlessly work and kind of integrate with one another quite easily, right? So if I have an iMac and I have an iPhone, my Safari tabs will go and be able to be, working between the two devices. I don't have to think anything about it. It's actually quite enhancing for my online experience to have that there.
Yeah, I mean, I am an Apple guy. I have Apple everything. I have the MacBook, Apple Watch. I've got the iPhone. They all work together beautifully. And it's kind of shocking to me reading the New York Times report where, the journalists are talking to investigators behind the scenes at the Department of Justice. And they seem to be asking these strange questions, which is why on earth would Apple dare make a product, a computer that works really well with their companion phone or watch? It's not a mystery. Convenience is the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the fact that Apple's watch works well with Apple and not with other software from other companies, is that really all that surprising? That's like saying Linux is going to, work with Microsoft. Obviously, it doesn't. They're different kinds of software. They have different kinds of experiences. So it's not all that surprising. I think like the funniest one that I saw within that New York Times reporting was, they were claiming that, Apple going and clamping down on its iMessage, ability for people to go and have the blue bubble, if you will, when they're texting other people, was somehow anti-competitive. And I just think that's so funny because I'm like, where's the harm to the consumer that it's a green bubble versus a blue bubble? And if you're a pro like me, you're using neither of the above. You're just using Signal or one of these other encrypted messaging apps.
It's so insulting because like you mentioned, there is this line in the New York Times report where the investigators are expressing a concern over Siri, the voice assistant, not working well with rival brands and other tech, which just, again, leads me to wonder who on earth would expect anything otherwise. It's like the classroom slacker making the case to the teacher that the straight A student in the front of the class is being anti-competitive by not sharing their work with them. Apple doesn't make products for LG, Samsung, and Nokia.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think the other aspect of this too is that it's a very backwards looking kind of approach of analysis, right? Especially in this era, this entire year where we've seen artificial intelligence kind of blow up everybody's understanding of what is possible and what these markets might look like in the future. We're getting hung up on the past. And I'm like, we have this burgeoning technology here right now that's starting to just really get integrated with the consumer side of the equation. You don't think that the ChatGPT voice assistant that will eventually get produced will probably be even better than Siri or Alexa or any of these other things? There's a massive opportunity there. And this is the thing that I always say about the tech sector. You are under this mandate to either innovate or become irrelevant. There's a reason why Intel doesn't go and make computers anymore and they just focus on chips. They went and they cast that stone a long time ago where they were not going to go and be as innovative. So now that's really where they focus, is on the chip side of the equation instead of actually making computers. And all these companies are underneath that same mandate. They have to constantly be innovating and bringing new things to the table. Otherwise, they will go and become irrelevant and it'll harm their business. And that's also demonstrated, by the way, in that New York Times reporting where Apple, for the first time since 2019, had a negative growth rate in one of its quarterly earnings reports, right? So it's not like this company's this big and impenetrable force that's somehow, this monopoly that they want it to be, the boogeyman, right? Like this is a company that faces market pressures like anyone else.
Folks, I'm talking to James Ternowski of Americans for Prosperity and Young Voices here on WIBC. And James, it does seem to me like a lot of the Federal Trade Commission's case, which they recently brought against Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, the video game studio behind Call of Duty, that it's very similar to what is going on with the DOJ and Apple here. Folks might recall that the judge who ruled in the FTC case ruled that Biden's FTC was basically working on behalf of Sony, a Japanese company, with their lawsuit that was going to stop Microsoft from acquiring Activision Blizzard, and it had no benefit to consumers. Why is the administration carrying water for tech companies and competitors from foreign rivals?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, it's just this animus that's grown against, the American tech companies over the last decade or so, starting in the European Union. But a lot of those ideas percolated over to our favorite state of California over there. And then, it's found its ways into the swamp that is Congress and everything else going on over there in the administration. They think big is bad. They can't quite articulate the anti-competitive harm. They operate underneath this theory that's more like, we can't really tell you what it is, but we know it when we see it. And it's a really inarticulate way of going about things. Like with that FTC case against Microsoft and Activision that you highlighted, one of the things that they tried claiming was going to be a consumer harm was how, they might have exclusive skins for Xbox versus the other platforms, more broadly speaking, which is just a gainer of over 20 years, Stephen. Like, That is just so ludicrous on its face to pretend that that's somehow a legitimate anti-competitive outcome that's going to harm consumers. And, unfortunately, it's just more of the same from this administration. And the people who are suffering at the end of the day as a result of this are Americans. They want somebody who's going to focus on tackling the issues that they care about, which are the economy, inflation, jobs. We're in a very low growth area right now. Like the World Economic Forum had just said that we're going to go through a slow growth period now, which is not great. We need to be focusing on how to go and get growth back into our economy. And that happens when we go and empower innovation and our tech sector, which represents over 10% of the United States' annual GDP.
Well, I am just really glad to know that our leaders, instead of managing our southern border, managing our economy in a way that sets it free to be its best, is instead focused on making my iPhone work worse. James Ternowski, thanks so much for coming on and breaking it down for us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I'm Stephen Kent. You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on WIBC. We'll be right back.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Just a curbside prophet with my hand in my pocket.
And we're back. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast, and I'm Stephen Kent, still filling in for Tony this week while he retakes Constantinople or whatever it is that man does on his vacation time. Anyways, I told you at the top of the show that the days of paper or plastic may be behind us. Aldi, the German discount grocery store that you see all over town, is getting rid of plastic bags. There are 80 Aldi grocery stores in Indiana. In the Indianapolis area, there are about 10. And I like Aldi, but I really do not like this. I find it annoying when I go to shop and then I forget to bring reusable bags and my bill is high enough as it is already without the cashier staring at me like I'm some kind of criminal and asking, "Oh, where are your bags?" No, I don't have my bags, but I thought you would have bags. Aldi CEO Jason Hart says we will like it and save money in the long run. So what do I know? David Clement is the policy director of the Consumer Choice Center. He does a lot of work on single-use plastic bags, and he's joining me now to explain this. David, thank you for being here. I want to know, do you have a positive view of the Aldi announcement on doing away with plastic bags? Is there something that I'm missing here to be hopeful about?
No, not really. I mean, they're a private company. They're entitled to go whatever direction they want to go. But I can't help but feel like they're giving in to the environmentalist pressure to get rid of plastic bags. And I've written extensively about how when you look at the life cycle analysis between a single-use plastic bag and the alternatives, whether they be like a cloth reusable bag, a cotton reusable bag, or paper, it may not sound intuitive to most listeners, but the single-use plastic bag is by far better for the environment in terms of the emissions and environmental impact involved. And so I'm happy to chat about some of the specifics there, because there's a lot of education needed on what is and isn't harmful for the environment.
Yeah, so I think most people imagine single-use plastic bags strangling turtles to death and all of their favorite fish in the sea, and that this is sort of the scourge of environmentalism is plastics. And so when you say that there is a net benefit to actually using these versus cloth bags or paper bags, I mean, I'll admit I'm a little confused. Where does that benefit exactly come from? And are we talking about emissions, or are we talking about plastic waste in the oceans?
Yeah, so what we're talking about is what the Environment Ministry in Denmark looked at. So essentially, they did a full life cycle analysis. They took 17 different environment indicators in their analysis. So everything from the impact on the ozone to the oceans to emissions. And they compared single-use plastic bags to paper and then to cloth alternatives. And so the kind of standard reusable bag, the cloth bag that a lot of stores will offer now, those have to be reused over 5,000 times in order to be equal to a single-use plastic bag, because the process to make those is so much more intensive. And so essentially it's not possible. No one is reusing the Aldi cloth bag enough time. We're talking a lifetime's worth of grocery store trips and more for every cloth bag you're using instead of plastic. And
yeah, they always tend to frame this as in some way it's the consumer that benefits, and Aldi is sort of couching this in, well, you know, consumers and customers, they get to decide what kind of bag they will use. They could use the paper, they could use the reusable plastics that they're going to have, or cloth bags. But at the end of the day, it's to me a blow against convenience. It's just, you go to the grocery store, they give you the single-use bags, you take them home, you shove them underneath your sink, and then you use them to pick up your dog poo in the backyard. Like, these are just useful items to have.
Well, yes. And so as full disclosure, I'm a Canadian. The federal government made a push to essentially ban those. And then what happens is you have, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 of these reusable bags, which would account for like tens and tens of thousands of single-use plastic bags in terms of environmental impact, all to try and nudge you to bring a bag. And every time you forget, you buy another one, which is obviously more expensive than the plastic bag, which was in most places 10 cents.
I've lost every bag I've ever purchased at a grocery store.
Yeah. And what's funny is the alternative for paper isn't better for the environment either. You have to reuse a paper bag 45 times in order for it to equal a single-use plastic bag. And if you're like me, you're lucky enough to get the paper bag out of the trunk when you get home without it breaking. Where, like you said, a single-use bag is used to line a garbage bin, or used to when you're walking your dog, or all sorts of other things before it's ultimately discarded. And so we have these alternatives which make us feel good, right? They make us feel like we're making a difference. But at the end of the day, it's a net negative for the environment. And that is ultimately the reason for this push, is environmental concerns, which are certainly valid. But the evidence isn't on the side of not using single-use plastic bags in comparison to the alternative. So,
yeah, I reflexively tend to support when, an organization, a private company like this has a prerogative. They have European values. They're sort of exporting that here to their U.S. stores. And, that's fine. If you want to shop at Aldi, shop at Aldi. I prefer Lidl personally. But the alternative is state bans. You mentioned that they've already done this in Canada. They've done this kind of stuff in the UK, California, Hawaii, New York, Connecticut, Delaware. All these sort of deep blue democratic bastions of power have all banned single-use plastics in some variety or another, and had their own voters and consumers pick up the tab on that instead. So, is it the silver lining that at least Indiana is not forcing it on all stores?
Yeah, it is. I guess that is better, because then obviously consumers, there are other grocery stores they can shop at if they really care about this. So it is better than a statewide ban and forcing the entire industry to shift. But that doesn't mean it's not annoying.
I personally feel deeply annoyed. Now, what do you make of the passing on savings to consumers claim? So we've talked about environmental impact, which there's more work, more labor, more emissions that goes into making the reusable bags than the single-use case bags. But when it also comes to savings, look, I've gone to discount grocers before. You sometimes have to put in a quarter in order to get a shopping cart, and they pass along those savings to you. They don't have grocery market cashiers, and they pass along those savings to you since they're not paying employees. This is kind of how the Amazon Fresh markets work, and they're making that case now with plastic bags. Do you find that to be a significant source for savings? Because I would just prefer that the products be cheaper and not inflated due to the Biden economy.
Well, it depends. If you're like most people I know who has a habit of occasionally forgetting, then no, it's not saving you money. I mean, in the Canadian context, in my own experience in that transition, when they started charging, let's say 10 cents a bag for plastic, the cost for the cloth bags that they provide are much more, 3.5, 4 times more expensive, at least. In some places they're $1. And so if you forget, you are obviously paying more. And so I'm not convinced on the savings claim based on consumer behavior and patterns. It all depends. I think it's just a weird way to try and justify the shift. When in reality, they just should have made, whether it would be true or not, they just should have made the environmental argument and said, we're doing this for the environment.
Well, for anyone just tuning in, we are talking to David Clement of the Consumer Choice Center. David, we've just got a minute here. I want to give you the final word on any sort of threats to consumer choice and low prices that you're seeing across the United States right now, particularly maybe as it pertains to plastics. What are you concerned about from what you do at the Consumer Choice Center?
Yeah, I mean, on plastics, there's a move from the GSA, which is essentially like the procurement arm of the federal government, to no longer acquire single-use plastics. That could cause a lot of headaches for people. It's a very macro issue, but they're the largest buyer of single-use plastics. And so if they stop, that completely reshifts supply chains for private companies.
Symbolism and posturing. I know Hoosiers have had enough, and one day they're not going to take it anymore. David Clement, Consumer Choice Center, thank you so much for coming on and breaking it down for us.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back after the break.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
They are right. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast, and I am Stephen Kent filling in for the wise and powerful Tony this evening. We're going to wrap up by going back to some politics here. We got to talk about Donald Trump, the Donald. I told you at the start of the show that he demolished the Republican primary field in Iowa on Monday. It was brutal. Trump notched 51% of the vote. That's 20 delegates, I believe. DeSantis barely scratched out 21%. Nikki Haley clawed for 19. Vivek, who knows how much Vivek made, but he's out of the race now. That's 17 delegates combined on the part of DeSantis and Nikki, and then 3 goes to Vivek. The Trump show is being renewed for a 10th season, my friends. There is no stopping it. This is what's happening at this point. Valiant effort for everybody around, I guess. DeSantis and Nikki Haley, they've tried to spin it. They are still spinning it all they want. But what happened in Iowa was a clear and strong rejection of those campaigns by Republicans. Now, I am not usually one to overinvest in the importance of the Iowa caucus. For starters, Iowa doesn't really pick winners. Remember Cruz, Huckabee, Santorum? Then I guess the last time they actually picked a winner was George W. Bush in 2000. Trump 2024 doesn't really count because, frankly, he's running as an incumbent. That's sort of the thing that a lot of commentators and even voters haven't quite even picked up on with Donald Trump's edge, is that he's not running as a resurgent candidate from the outside. He's running as an incumbent president. The primaries start in Iowa and New Hampshire out of tradition. And it's a pretty young one, by the way. Like, this didn't start until the 1970s. So we've only been doing this for a couple of decades. There is no law saying that presidential races have to begin in Iowa or New Hampshire. So I don't want to overstate the importance of Iowa, but there is something to be said for that the GOP could redo their schedule, just like the Democrats have. To begin with, you could, start with states that more closely reflect the voter base that they're going to encounter around the rest of the country. I don't know. You could stay in the same region, Wisconsin, or you could go back to my home state of North Carolina, a very representative purple state for the general election. Maybe you could start with the good people of Indiana. I think that would be a good idea. But 30 points? 30 points between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and Haley. That is grim writing on the wall. And I like DeSantis a lot. I really do. That guy has crushed the radical left in Florida. He has infuriated the national media, MSNBC, CNN, NPR, all of them, by refusing to accept that parents like myself should submit to having their kids sexualized in second grade. It is common sense, and he has led with a lot of integrity. Ron has done good by the people of Florida and turned that place into a refuge from woke lunatics like Governor Kathy Hochul of New York, the Gavin Newsoms of the world, and whatever is left of President Joe Biden. And look, Nikki Haley, there's a lot of nice things you could say about her. She was a good governor. Again, I'm from the Carolinas, so she was just south of us, and I was always impressed by what she was doing down there. You'd see her at events in North Carolina as well. She's a fine leader. But I don't really care that much about her time spent hobnobbing at the UN and playing nice with dictators as ambassador. I will say that that's a decent skill to have in the real world. It's pretty ugly out there, in case you haven't noticed. But what I really hate in my gut about the primary election process is pretending otherwise. Pretending that I don't like DeSantis and that I don't like Haley and that they aren't solid Republican executives who have led with integrity and done good things for our values. And you should hate it too, because watching Haley and Ron DeSantis pretend to think that one another are bad Republicans or failed governors or bad on COVID or woke or, destroying education in their states. It's all a fraud. And we are supposed to cheer for it while the mainstream media hosts their own debates designed to pit Republicans against each other and get them to embarrass one another and smear their records. No, it's garbage. Republicans should never submit to a debate with CNN ever again before actual conservative media outlets get a chance to question the candidates. Hell, maybe Tony Kinnett should host the next debate. How do we make that happen? We're just going to We're going to lobby WIBC. We're going to make that happen. So Tony Kinnett is hosting the next debate. And then you would actually get representative questions that you care about. But seriously, what has to happen after Iowa and before the red herring of New Hampshire and South Carolina? I'm calling it a red herring because it might be good for Nikki Haley. She's going to do better in New Hampshire and she's going to do better in her home state of South Carolina, but it's going to be misleading. Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley need to call it quits, or they need to form a ticket. Someone has to drop out, and it should probably be Nikki Haley. Why? Because Governor Ron DeSantis' voters are more aligned with Trump. If he drops out, they're going to go home to daddy, go back to the Donald, just like they did with Vivek Ramaswamy. If neither Nikki nor Ron have the humility to exit this race and back their rival, then they both need to go home, back to Florida, and Nikki needs to go back to her mansion on Kiowa Island. Nice place, by the way. We've seen this movie. We have seen this movie before, where Republicans divide their support between Trump alternatives. That's exactly what happened in 2016. And here's the thing. They are not up against Trump of 2016. Like I said, Trump, the real estate mogul and reality show host, is gone. We are talking about a guy who, between 60 and 70% of Republican voters polled by CNN, believe him to be the incumbent president who had an election stolen from him in 2020. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that that is wrong. That way of thinking could unravel this country. And I do not want my young daughter to grow up in an unraveled country where nobody believes in the legitimacy of elections anymore. But that is what many Republican voters, a lot of our listeners here tonight, do feel about Trump's defeat in 2020 against Joe Biden, that they put their thumb on the scale in every possible way, from big tech and social media companies to mail-in ballots to COVID this and COVID that. We're operating under a very different set of rules in this year's campaign. Incumbents win, and Trump's campaign is an incumbent campaign. So the alternatives, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, they need to get serious. They need to get serious about this and start thinking about strategy, or they need to get out of the way. You've been listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC. I'm Stephen Kent. I've been your host tonight. I'm going to be back tomorrow. I'm super excited to be filling in for Tony Kinnett. And if you want to get in touch and send me some hate mail or fan mail, I am on Twitter or X or whatever you call it these days at Stephen Kent X. And be sure to follow 93 WIBC. We'll see you tomorrow. Be safe out there. And hey, stay free.